back to another edition of TCM Graduate TV. I'm Kenton Sefcik, registered acupuncturist, and today is the first video for a viewer question. Somebody was commenting on my tongue diagnostics for my Instagram post, and they were saying how they appreciate the breakdown, and of course, it's very objective. If I say that a person has red prickles along the sides of their tongue, and that most likely is showing that they have heat in the liver gallbladder area, you'll be able to see that as well. But with pulse, it's actually very tricky to learn, and I've got a couple different ways to learn pulse, and this viewer was saying, hey Ken, I would really appreciate it if you could help me with pulse because I'm having a hard time. Now this is the way I approach pulse, and maybe it'll help you, maybe not, but I kind of approached it from a two-tier point of view. The first thing that I was taught was to compare. And something that I developed later on was I realized what I needed to do for the rest of the pulse diagnostics, which we'll get to, is I needed to reverse engineer the learning process. We'll deal with this one in a second, but right now I just want to talk about comparing pulse. Many people are taught to check the pulse one side at a time. And a clinic supervisor by the name of Colton Oswald told me, don't do that. You're going to take a longer time to kind of get it. And what he recommended that I do is actually compare rear to rear, middle to middle, and front to front. So what we're doing when we do this is typically I will put both hands on my patient's wrists. I will drop them heavy down as far as I can to check to make sure that there's depth within the pulse, and then I start to back off. So I check, past deep just to kind of compress the pulse, and then I start working my way back up. And this will just kind of get a general read on where both pulses are and where kind of that middle ground is where I can feel all three, or where I should be feeling all three sections, so rear, middle, and front. And then what I start to do is I start to compare. So I'll start to compare kidney yin to kidney yang, I'll start to compare spleen to liver, I'll start to compare lung to heart. And what this will help me do is determine if any actual organs from a yin point of view are deficient or in excess. And that was the first thing that I started to realize, is if I had a patient where I was feeling a pulse, and let's say this is left rear, and this is deficient compared to the other one, and they're also exhibiting other kidney yin deficiency signs. Let's say they come in, they've got lower back pain, soreness or weakness in the knees, maybe it's a female patient, maybe they've got hot flashes and night sweating, and this would actually kind of back up, almost like how I use language in the clinic. I find language is the most important thing in the clinic, and then the tongue kind of backs me up with my diagnosis. And then from there, the pulse would be kind of a mess. And I would say, oh no, I don't know if the pulse is actually backing up my diagnosis. So in this case, I'm typically looking for more deficiency signs when I check these, left to rights. And what that's helping me do is kind of back up my diagnosis. So the other thing that needs to be said is that a lot of times pulses are long or almost like overflowing. So if we're checking heart and lung area on the pulse, then what we need to do is we need to determine, are these spilling over? And what I typically will do is I'll check that pulse with my first finger, and then I'll roll it into the thenar eminence to see if it's continued into that area. And if it, let's say, this left front is where I'm feeling that overflow, then I would posit that that patient has too much, whatever it may be, too much heat or excess in that organ, so that would be heart excess, and I could use that to back up my diagnosis. So maybe a patient is having nightmares, and I might think it might be due to heart heat or heart fire. That would kind of back up my diagnosis. So try that. Take your patient's pulse on both sides, compare rear to rear, middle to middle, and front to front. Look for deficiencies, excesses, if it's long in the back or if it's long in the front. So that kind of takes care of maybe the onset or the beginning stages of learning how to take the pulse. I still do this. So my first time I take the pulse and I check all those check those depths, I check all those positions, and then I start to go through my memory banks and I start to reverse engineer the process of the 28 pulse images. So everything's gonna go white for a second, and then we're gonna come back and I'm gonna have some other stuff on the board. It's gonna be quite magical. All right, we'll see you in a second. There we go. So we've got 28 pulse images that we are aware of in Chinese medicine, that we're made aware of in school especially. You've got 28, you better memorize those, you better figure them out. And Bob Flaws wrote an excellent book called The Secret of Pulse Diagnosis. And I highly recommend you get the book, but sorry Bob, I'm gonna give a couple things away today. What Bob was saying in his book, that the secret to mastering pulse diagnosis is to memorize the poems or the metaphors that are used to describe different pulse characteristics. And what he means by that is I practice a traditional Chinese martial art, as you may or may not know. And in Wing Chun Kung Fu, we have a saying, for example, the punch comes from the heart. The idea about this is that the punch comes from the heart, so you're supposed to bring your fist to the center before you extend. That will protect your center line, and it'll also hit the person on their center of mass. What this also means, obviously, is that when you're fighting, you better have heart. When you're training, you better have heart. And so a lot of times the metaphors mean more than they say. So here we have, I wrote 4 pulse diagnostics, and I just want to go through them, and then I want to give you an example of how you can reverse engineer. Remember, I had reverse engineer over here. Reverse engineer the process of learning these pulse diagnostics. Learning Chinese medicine is quite difficult. What we typically do is we learn kidney yin deficiency, and we learn a plethora of signs and symptoms that a patient can come in with, and it's quite mind-boggling that you have to memorize this. Now, when the patient comes in, what are you doing? You're reverse engineering. Patient comes in with lower back pain, soreness or weakness in the knees, hot flashes, night sweating, whatever case may be, heart palpitations, and you say, oh my goodness, this patient has a heart yin deficiency. I've got this, because you've memorized it and then you've reverse engineered the process. Well, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's Bob's way of thinking. So you're gonna memorize this stuff and then you're gonna reverse engineer the process. And then I'm gonna add another dimension to that. So here we have wiry, which is taut like a guitar string. Now, who would you generally feel wiry on? That's right, somebody with a ton of stress, or maybe a ton of pain. So that's when we describe that somebody should have a wiry pulse. So why shouldn't we be seeking those people out? If you have a family member or a patient or somebody you know and they're in immense pain, maybe physical pain or maybe even emotional pain, or they're under a ton of stress, we need to go find those people. We need to tell them, I need to check your pulse. And that's what a wiry pulse should feel like, so that's the best way to learn it. So that's reverse engineering the process. So you've got to memorize that wiry is taut like a guitar string, so that's what it's supposed to feel like. But then what we can do is we can be a lot more objective about it, because we can take a stressed out patient and you and I can both check the pulse and go, yeah, that's pretty wiry. So that's one way of dealing with the wiry pulse. Another one is choppy, and it's supposed to feel like a knife on bamboo. So if you could think about cutting a knife on bamboo, it's almost like your finger is feeling that knife scrape across that bamboo. So choppy is going to go tick, 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 tick. It's going to kind of cut. You're going to feel it be jagged on your fingers. Now, when would we feel a choppy pulse? Well, generally 2 cases. So we have either blood deficiency or we have blood stasis. So if you've got a family member, again, a patient, maybe they broke a bone, and obviously we would say, oh, you're supposed to see purple on the tongue. Well, you're supposed to feel a choppy pulse. Or maybe who's lost a lot of blood. Maybe somebody had childbirth and they ended up losing a lot of blood. So we need to understand that those patients are typically going to have a choppy pulse. And of course, medication can play a role in skewing all this stuff, but just in general, we're talking about how somebody with blood deficiency or blood stagnation would have a choppy pulse. So we need to go find that person. Slippery, like pearls rolling in a dish. You can imagine trying to hold a dish and the pearls are rolling all around. It'd be quite difficult to do. That's what you're going to feel like, almost like some people say greasy or kind of bubbling. So we're going to feel those kinds of things in the pulse. When would we feel that? Guaranteed when somebody's pregnant. So we need to find as many pregnant women as possible, and we need to run up to them and check their pulse. And you're going to look for that feeling. And again, I'm going to feel it, you're going to feel it, and we're going to go, hey, that's a pregnancy pulse. That person's slippery. And then we'll know the odd time if a pulse is minorly slippery, it's considered that is a normal pulse. However, if somebody's full of phlegm, damp, and or is pregnant, it would be typically slippery pulse. We need to go find those people. Last but not least, we have a leathery pulse, and I use this one because it's kind of fun. Like a crashing and retreating wave. So you're gonna feel this thing, it's gonna hit your fingertips, and it's gonna say, hey, I'm really strong, and then it's gonna back off and go, nah, but I'm not really that strong. And when would we typically feel this? Well, this is when you have a patient who's got severe maybe kidney yin or essence deficiency. They're burnt out. So if you have a patient maybe referred to you by a naturopathic doctor and you've been told by the ND that they have adrenal fatigue and it's very severe, which is kind of akin to kind of maybe a kidney yin, kidney essence deficiency, a lot of times we're going to feel a leathery pulse. The other time we're going to feel a leathery pulse is if you have a very elderly patient and maybe they're not being propped up by Western medical drugs. So that's when we're going to run out and find those people. We're going to find out all the burnt out people, and we're going to find all the stressed people, and we're going to find all the pregnancy people, and we're going to find all the people that have a cast. And we're going to find all those people, and we're going to check their pulse, and we're going to try to log in our memory banks what that feels like. And that's how I reverse engineer this process, and I really hope it helps you. So just to recap, check rear to rear, middle to middle, front to front, checking all depths, seeing if anything's deficient or in excess, and that will kind of back up your diagnostic. And last but not least, you want to reverse engineer and memorize these metaphors. You don't have to go buy Bob's book. You can just get a lot of these stuff online as well. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you for the question. I hope this helps. Safety is king, bedside manner is king, results are king in that order. We'll see you on the next video. Thank you.